greenhouse gas regulations. You guys probably heard a lot more about this than some of the other issues. EPA promulgated in 2009 and 10, they promulgated a few of the regulations, the major regulations that the greenhouse gas regulatory regime is based on. The endangerment finding from 2009, the vehicle rule in 2010, the timing and tailoring rule that went along with it that stepped the threshold level of greenhouse gas. So right now, agriculture operations not subject to greenhouse gas regulation because we don't produce enough of them. It's a pretty high level, 100,000 tons per year. What happens under this timing and tailoring rule is that level is lowered over time because it's supposed to give permitting agencies time to kind of deal with the large number of people that need to get permits. In the last rule that EPA put out, they maintained the level, so they kept it high so that they didn't put a burden on smaller emitters. In the cattle industry, we actually do have a few operations that do hit that 100,000 tons per year mark. These are obviously big operations. And unfortunately, some of our environmentally friendly practices like composting is what jumps us up there. So a lot of times, and it's really unfortunate, it kind of like goes back to the dust issue that we use water that shouldn't be used in a drought-ridden area to put down dust. Something very similar happens here in greenhouse gas situation. Our composting puts us above the limit. Environmentally friendly practices end up hurting us and putting us in a regulatory system that we otherwise wouldn't be in. In 2016 is the projected date that agriculture operations, smaller emitters, will start to be wrapped up into the greenhouse gas permitting scheme. What NCBA has done, we have, back in 2009, we actually got an appropriations rider put in appropriations language that has stayed in there ever since that prevents EPA from requiring a Title V permit from a livestock operation due to greenhouse gas emissions. So we kind of have a safeguard in there for right now. Now the appropriations, the current appropriations bill or continuing resolution as it is, goes through March. And so at the end of March we'll have a new one, and so we have to make sure that those riders, riders have really been our safeguard in the last few years. We've gotten some pretty successful ones, especially some grazing ones out west that have kind of kept federal agencies at bay. And one of them is very important. One of them is a greenhouse gas reporting rule that livestock producers are supposed to report to EPA their greenhouse gas productions. We've had that one in there that prevents EPA from requiring that from livestock producers, and then the other one is that Title V prevents them from requiring a permit. But if they lower that threshold, you're not just going to see some big operations wrapped into it. We're going to start seeing some much smaller livestock operations be wrapped into it. And if they redo the quote-unquote fugitive rules, which fugitive just doesn't come out of a pipe or a stack, if they redo the fugitive rule, which they're scheduled to do, we could see a lot more operations. We could see row crop operations come under greenhouse gas regulations. Now that's going to be a permitting nightmare for them, and they know that. So we might be able to push it off a little bit, but it eventually will start to affect us. Because of the impacts of the greenhouse gas regulation, NCBA, along with a host of industry petitioners, filed suit against challenging the whole premise, basically challenging the endangerment finding that EPA bases all of its regulations on with regard to greenhouse gases. And we unfortunately lost last year in the DC circuit. The last step is challenging. We also asked for a rehearing en banc there, and we're denied that as well. And so the last step is to move to the Supreme Court. And based on the and I said earlier that we probably would lose the Supreme Court, and that's basically based on some of the the other cases that the court has heard recently that they've thrown out because they say EPA has the authority to regulate greenhouse gases, so we don't need these nuisance lawsuits. So that's why I say that. So it's unfortunately, and it's something we have to deal with, and so we're really trying to work with the regulatory agencies, EPA, to make sure that there's some kind of streamlining approach to try to make it easier for producers and to try to, whether that's trying to exempt practices like composting because they are environmentally friendly, or other options. So we're working with them right now to try to help producers when that 2016 date rolls around. There was legislation, let's see, in the 112th, there was legislation that prevented, a number of pieces of legislation that passed the House that would have prevented EPA from regulating greenhouse gases. Obviously, none of those saw the light of day in the Senate. And now, based on Hurricane Sandy and some other issues and the drought, there has been a lot of talk about whether we have a carbon tax put in place, which that could look like something you guys might have heard of, the cow tax, or a cap and trade legislation, or some other kind of climate change legislation. The Senate, in the Senate committee, the Environmental and Public Works Committee, headed by Barbara Boxer from California, she has created a clearinghouse for climate change legislation, and so she wants all of her colleagues to bring her ideas on how to address climate change. President Obama has actually put down the idea of a carbon tax and said he would not be advocating for a carbon tax, which is a good thing. Cap and trade, with the House still in control of the Republicans, that will not happen, and most likely anything the Senate comes up with, the House will not pass. So as far as legislation goes, I really don't see anything that has a chance, really, of passing, just because of the dynamics in the two chambers. So really what we have to do, if we think we're going to lose in the Supreme Court, is we just have to prepare and try to make these rules as easy as possible to implement on our operations.